He called me sweetheart, right in front of the entire room, just minutes after I'd explained how one tiny contract clause could wipe millions off our balance sheet. He thought it was a joke. I knew it was a trap that had been set years ago, and what he never suspected was that I held the key to spring it. 6 months later, he lost everything, and all I had to do was sit back and watch. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine was served at exactly the temperature of a balance sheet drowning in red ink. My name is Clara Jensen, and for 12 years, I was the invisible backbone of Vanguard Axis Solutions. You know the type, the person who knows where every skeleton is buried, which contracts have poison pills, and exactly how many days we have before a supplier pulls the plug. I wasn't flashy. I didn't have an MBA from Wharton or a golf handicap worth bragging about. What I had was something far more valuable: institutional memory and the ability to see disasters coming from miles away. Our Denver office sat on the 32nd floor of a glass tower that caught the morning sun like a prism. Every day at 7:30 a.m. sharp, I'd arrive to find the same scene: gleaming surfaces, the smell of overpriced coffee, and the quiet hum of a machine that never stopped grinding. Vanguard marketed itself as a next-generation logistics solutions provider, which was corporate speak for we move stuff from point A to point B and charge a premium for using fancy software. The company culture preached speed and efficiency, but what that really meant was cutting corners until the corners didn't exist anymore. I'd built my reputation on being the one who kept those cuts from bleeding us dry. Supply chain management isn't sexy. It's spreadsheets and phone calls at 2 a.m. when a shipment gets stuck in customs. It's knowing which warehouse manager will bend rules for a bottle of good bourbon. It's memorizing every clause in contracts so thick they could stop bullets. But I was good at it. Hell, I was exceptional at it. My office, back when I still had one worth mentioning, was tucked in the southeast corner. Small but with a view of the mountains. The walls were lined with binders nobody else bothered to read. Each one containing the DNA of our operations. I knew every vendor's payment terms, every client's trigger points, every distribution center's capacity down to the last pallet space. This knowledge lived in my head, but more importantly, it lived in the meticulously organized files I'd maintained since my 3rd year at the company. The trouble started when Evan Brooks arrived. Evan was everything corporate America seems to worship these days, 31 years old. Stanford MBA, crisp white shirts that probably cost more than most people's car payments, and a smile that looked practiced in front of a mirror. He came in as our new VP of Operations, brought in by the board to inject fresh thinking into our processes. His resume glittered with stint at consulting firms and tech startups, but ask him about actual logistics, about what happens when a reefer unit fails on a truck carrying pharmaceuticals, or how to navigate union negotiations at a port, and his eyes would glaze over before pivoting to talk about leveraging synergies or digital transformation. I remember our first real interaction. It was a Tuesday morning in March, the kind where spring was trying to break through but winter kept its grip tight. The conference room was full of department heads, and I was presenting our Q2 risk assessment. I had identified 17 potential failure points in our supply chain, each one annotated with mitigation strategies I'd developed over years of trial and error. "Clara," Evan interrupted, not even 10 minutes into my presentation, "this is all very thorough, but don't you think we're overthinking this? Our partners have been with us for years. They're not going anywhere." The room went quiet. Several people shifted in their seats. They knew what I knew, that our loyal partners were one delayed payment away from walking, that contracts weren't handshakes and good intentions. They were carefully balanced ecosystems that could collapse with one wrong move. "Respectfully," I said, keeping my voice steady, "North Point Packaging has a performance clause that triggers at 92.5% fulfillment rate. We're currently operating at 94.1. That's a razor-thin margin, especially considering—" "I appreciate the history lesson." He cut me off again, that practiced smile never wavering. "But we need to focus on growth, not paranoia. We're not here to babysit percentages." That was the moment I knew. This man was going to destroy everything I'd built, and he'd do it with a smile and a PowerPoint deck. The only question was whether I'd still be around to watch it burn. The seeds of conflict were planted in small, deliberate acts of disrespect. Evan had a talent for making his contempt look like leadership. He'd schedule optimization meetings at 4:45 p.m. on Fridays. Knowing I had to pick up my diabetic cat from the vet for weekly treatments, he'd request complete supply chain audits with 12-hour turnarounds, then barely glance at them before declaring them too granular. But the real poison was how he systematically undermined the very foundations I'd spent years building. It started with what he called streamlining. Evan eliminated the weekly risk assessment meetings, calling them anxiety sessions. He cut the budget for our third-party compliance audits in half. The vendor relationship protocols I'd developed check-ins every 48 hours. Performance metrics tracked daily. Early warning systems for disruptions were dismissed as micromanagement. "Clara," he said during one particularly infuriating afternoon meeting, "you're treating our partners like they're children. These are Fortune 500 companies. They don't need us hovering." What Evan didn't understand, what he refused to understand, was that I wasn't hovering. I was holding together a web of relationships with spider silk and stubborn determination. Take North Point Packaging, for instance. They were our second largest partner, handling 40% of our West Coast distribution. The contract I'd negotiated with them 3 years ago was a masterpiece of careful balance. We got preferred rates and priority processing, but in exchange, we had to maintain that 92.5% quarterly fulfillment rate. Drop below that, even by a fraction, and they could terminate immediately with no penalty. The clause was buried on page 87 of the contract, subsection 14B, written in the kind of legal language that makes your eyes water. Evan had never read it. I knew this because when I tried to bring it up during a strategy session, he waved me off. "Nobody actually enforces those kinds of clauses," he said, his voice dripping with the confidence of someone who'd never been on the receiving end of a contract termination. "It's just lawyer padding." But I knew better. I knew because I'd saved us from triggering that exact clause twice before. Once during the port strikes 2 years ago, when I'd personally driven to Sacramento at 3 a.m. to negotiate with an independent trucking company. Another time during the holiday rush, when I'd called in favors from 3 different vendors to reroute shipments through alternative channels. Both times, we'd scrape by with rates of 92.7 and 92.6% respectively. Both times, nobody knew how close we'd come to disaster because I'd handled it quietly, efficiently, the way I handled everything. Evan didn't just ignore these near misses. He actively dismantled the safeguards that prevented them. He reassigned 2 of my best analysts to his new innovation task force, which seemed to consist mainly of creating slide decks about blockchain and AI without any actual implementation. He brought in Devin Fitzgerald, a 26-year-old fresh from McKinsey, as a strategic consultant who suddenly had opinions about routing algorithms despite never having seen the inside of a distribution center. The Thursday that changed everything was unseasonably warm for April. I was reviewing our Q2 projections when I noticed something alarming. Our on-time delivery rate had dropped to 93.8%. We were trending downward, and fast. The causes were obvious. Evan's optimizations had removed slack from the system, eliminated backup routes, and stretched our remaining drivers too thin. I documented everything in a comprehensive report, 23 pages of data, projections, and recommendations. I even highlighted the specific section of the North Point contract, added an executive summary and bullet points for easy digestion, and created 3 different action plans ranging from aggressive to conservative. I sent it to Evan with high priority flagging and requested an immediate meeting. His response came 3 days later, CCing the entire leadership team. "Clara, I appreciate your diligence, but we need to focus on solutions, not problems. Your catastrophizing is affecting team morale. Let's discuss moving you to a role better suited to your careful nature." That email was the moment I realized something crucial. Evan wasn't just ignorant. He was willfully blind, and he wanted everyone to close their eyes with him. He'd rather drive the company off a cliff than admit someone else might see the road better than he did. But here's the thing about contracts, especially ones with nuclear clauses: they don't care about egos or office politics. They're just words on paper, waiting patiently to explode. And I had the detonator. The erosion of my authority happened in public. Deliberate cuts designed to bleed out my credibility drop by drop. Evan had mastered the art of corporate assassination death by 1,000 dismissive smiles and interrupted sentences. It started with the meeting removals. First, I was uninvited from the executive supply chain review. A meeting I'd attended for 8 years. We're keeping it lean, Evan explained, as if my presence was somehow fattening the agenda. Then came the strategic planning sessions, the vendor relations summits, even the mundane budget allocation reviews. My calendar, once packed with back-to-back commitments, began showing white spaces that felt like missing teeth. The data purge came next. One Monday morning in early May, I logged into our shared drive to find entire folders missing. 5 years of historical trending data gone. The vendor performance scorecards I'd meticulously maintained deleted. The risk mitigation playbooks that had saved us countless times wiped clean. We're moving to a new cloud-based system, Devin announced cheerfully when I confronted him. Evan says we need to stop living in the past. That past includes active contract obligations, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Legal requirements. Audit trails we're required to maintain for... I'm sure it's all backed up somewhere, Devin interrupted, already turning back to his screen where a presentation titled Logistics 3.0 The Future is Now glowed in sans serif arrogance. But I knew it wasn't backed up. Evan had given the IT department direct orders to clean house without creating archives. He called it forced innovation. If people couldn't rely on old data, they'd have to create new solutions. What he didn't understand was that in supply chain management, historical data wasn't nostalgia. It was navigation. Without it, we were driving blind through a minefield we'd already mapped. The personnel shifts were the cruelest cuts. Marcus Rodriguez, my senior analyst who could spot a routing inefficiency from 1,000 miles away, was transferred to special projects, which turned out to be digitizing paper invoices in a basement office. Sarah Kim, who managed our carrier relationships with the delicacy of a diplomat, was moved to customer service, fielding complaints she used to prevent. One by one, my team was scattered like dandelion seeds, their expertise wasted on tasks beneath their capabilities. You're too traditionally minded, Clara. Evan told me during what he called a coaching session, but felt more like a sentencing. We were in his corner office, the one with the view of the entire mountain range, the one that used to belong to someone who actually understood logistics. You're holding on to old ways of doing things. This company needs fresh perspectives. Fresh perspectives. I couldn't help the edge in my voice. Like Devin's suggestion to use drone delivery for hazardous materials, that's not fresh. It's federal prison. Evan's jaw tightened. Devin is thinking outside the box. The box exists for a reason. It's called regulatory compliance. He leaned back in his chair, that practiced smile spreading across his face like an oil slick. See, this is exactly what I mean. You're so focused on what could go wrong. You can't see opportunities. Maybe it's time we found you a position that better suits your risk-averse nature. The irony was breathtaking. Risk-averse. I'd built my entire career on calculating risks, managing them, turning potential disasters into minor inconveniences. But Evan didn't want risk management. He wanted yes-men who would applaud while he juggled flaming torches in a fireworks factory. The weekly operations report became my only remaining window into the company's vital signs. And what I saw was cardiac arrest in slow motion. On-time delivery had dropped to 93.1%. Customer complaints were up 40%. We'd had 3 near-miss safety incidents in our Dallas facility, all due to rushed loading procedures from Evan's efficiency improvements. I documented everything in my personal files, saving copies to an encrypted drive I kept in my purse. Every email where Evan dismissed safety concerns. Every meeting minutes where Devin proposed something illegal or impossible. Every data point showing our gradual slide toward the cliff. The Monday when I found my office relocated was when I knew the end was near. No announcement, no warning. I arrived at 7:30 a.m. to find maintenance removing my nameplate. My new workspace was a cubicle on the 3rd floor, next to the printer room. The constant mechanical whirring and toner smell made it clear I wasn't being relocated. I was being buried. It's part of the open office concept, the HR representative explained with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Evan believes in breaking down hierarchical barriers. Hierarchical barriers. That's what they called 12 years of expertise now. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the contracts and documents I'd been quietly copying for months. The North Point Agreement lay open to page 87. subsection 14B, highlighted in yellow. Our Q2 fulfillment rate was trending toward 91.9%. We had 6 weeks left in the quarter, 6 weeks until the bomb went off. And I realized with perfect clarity I didn't have to stop it anymore. The decision to let go of the wheel came to me at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. As I sat in my home office reviewing emergency routing options for a shipment that was about to miss its delivery window, my phone had been buzzing with panicked texts from Marcus, who was still trying to help despite being buried in the basement with invoices. A container of pharmaceuticals was stuck in Phoenix. The backup driver had called in sick, and we were about to breach our service agreement with Medcore distributors. I had the solution mapped out in 15 minutes. 3 phone calls to independent contractors I'd cultivated relationships with over the years. A favor called in from a competitor who owed me from when I'd helped them during the Houston floods. The shipment would make it with 2 hours to spare. Crisis averted. Disaster prevented. Another invisible save that would never make it into any performance review. I was halfway through dialing the first number when I stopped. Why was I doing this? Why was I saving a company that had made it abundantly clear I was worthless to them? I sat there in the dark, phone in hand, the weight of 12 years pressing down on my shoulders. And then I set the phone down and went back to bed. The shipment was 6 hours late. Medcore filed a formal complaint. From that night forward, I adopted a new strategy, malicious compliance. I did exactly what was asked of me, no more, no less. When Evan wanted reports, I gave him reports, sanitized, optimistic reports that showed exactly what he wanted to see. I removed all the warning flags, all the risk assessments, all the catastrophizing he found so distasteful. "Great work, Clara," he actually said after reading one particularly fiction-filled summary. "See, when you focus on the positive, everything looks better." Everything looked better because I'd stopped showing him the rot underneath. The North Point fulfillment rate dropped to 92.8%. I didn't flag it. A major client expressed concerns about delivery inconsistencies. I summarized it as routine feedback. 3 drivers quit citing unsafe scheduling demands. I reported it as normal turnover. Meanwhile, I became a ghost in my own workplace. I arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, no more early mornings preparing for fires. I left at 5 p.m. exactly, no more late nights preventing disasters. I attended only the meetings I was explicitly invited to, spoke only when directly asked, and offered no unsolicited solutions. Clara's finally learning to be a team player. I overheard Devin tell someone in the break room. She stopped being so negative all the time. If only he knew. I wasn't being positive. I was documenting their destruction. Every email, every decision, every ignored warning was carefully preserved on my personal drives. I created what I privately called the autopsy file, a comprehensive record of every choice that led to the coming catastrophe. The storage unit I rented was small but sufficient. Box after box of contracts, correspondence, and contingency plans I'd developed over the years. Physical copies of everything, because I knew that when the ship went down, Evan's first move would be to blame the people who'd tried to prevent it. These documents were my life insurance policy. The art of strategic neglect required careful calibration. I couldn't be obviously sabotaging that would be actionable. Instead, I simply stopped compensating for everyone else's incompetence. When Devon's routing algorithm sent 3 trucks to the same location and none to another, I processed it exactly as directed. When Evan's optimized scheduling created a 20-hour shift for a driver, I filed it without comment. When the new inventory system Devon implemented started showing phantom stock that didn't exist, I dutifully entered the numbers as displayed. The Q2 numbers are looking challenging. Our CFO mentioned during a rare meeting I was still invited to. "It's just a transition period," Evan assured him. "Once everyone adapts to the new systems, efficiency will skyrocket." I nodded along pleasantly, knowing that our fulfillment rate had just hit 92.6%, 0.1% above the threshold. We were balanced on a knife's edge, and Evan was jumping up and down on the blade. The personal cost of this decision wasn't insignificant. Watching something you'd built slowly crumble goes against every instinct. It's like being a surgeon who has to watch someone botch an operation you could perform with your eyes closed. But every time I wavered, I remembered Evan's smirk when he called me sweetheart in front of the board. I remembered Devon's dismissive laugh when I tried to explain contract law. I remembered my office being moved next to the printer like I was obsolete equipment being stored until disposal. By the end of May, I'd stopped checking the metrics altogether. Whatever was going to happen would happen. I'd removed my hands from the controls, and the plane was now in freefall. The only question was how long it would take for someone to notice we were heading straight for the ground. The answer, as it turned out, was far too late. The final marginalization happened with surgical precision, like watching someone disconnect your life support one tube at a time while explaining it's for your own good. June arrived with a reorganization announcement that surprised no one, least of all me. "We're creating a more agile structure," Evan announced at the all-hands meeting, his slides filled with interconnected circles and arrows that meant nothing. Clara Jensen will be transitioning to a senior advisory role, allowing her to focus on strategic guidance while Devin Fitzgerald takes operational ownership of supply chain management. Senior advisory, in corporate speak, that's one step above person we're keeping around until legal says we can fire them. My new role came with no direct reports, no decision-making authority, and most importantly, no system access. "You'll be invaluable as a consultant," Evan told me afterward, that practiced smile never wavering. "Devin will definitely want to tap into your institutional knowledge." Devin, who couldn't tell the difference between LTL and FTL shipping. Devin, who thought you could negotiate with unions via email. Devin, who had suggested we could save money by shipping refrigerated goods in standard containers if we just shipped them faster. This was the person now holding the keys to a $12 billion supply chain. The system lockout happened on a Wednesday. I arrived to find my credentials revoked from every critical platform: the vendor management system, the routing software, the contract database I'd built from scratch. Even my email was migrated to a new domain advisory, Vanguard Access, com. Might as well have been retirement. Vanguard Access, com. It's for security purposes. It explained when I called. Only operational staff can access operational systems. 12 years of documentation, gone. Every template I'd created, every macro I'd programmed, every contact list I'd cultivated, all transferred to Devin's control. Or so they thought. They didn't know about the backup drives. They didn't know about the physical contracts in my storage unit. They didn't know that I'd been BCCing my personal email on every critical communication for the past 3 months. My new office, if you could call it that, was a shared space on the second floor, a glorified conference room with 3 other senior advisors who'd been similarly sidelined. We were the corporate equivalent of ghosts, haunting the building without purpose or power. "At least they're still paying us," Margaret from accounting said. She'd been moved to advisory after questioning some suspicious invoices from one of Evan's preferred vendors. "For now," I replied, knowing exactly how this movie ended. Devin's first week in charge was a masterclass in incompetence. He immediately implemented what he called Dynamic Routing 2.0, which was essentially letting an AI algorithm plan routes without human oversight. The AI, not understanding real-world constraints like bridge weight limits or union-mandated break times, created routes that looked efficient on paper but were disasters in practice. "Clara, could you take a look at this?" Marcus texted me privately. "Dallas is showing 17 trucks scheduled for the same dock at 9 a.m. "Not my department anymore," I replied, even though every fiber of my being wanted to fix it. "Check with Devin." The dock chaos resulted in $400,000 in detention fees. Devin blamed it on the drivers not synchronizing properly. Week 2 brought the inventory crisis. Devin had given all warehouse managers autonomy to optimize, which meant no one was following the same counting procedures anymore. We had phantom inventory appearing and disappearing across 6 facilities. A client ordered 10,000 units we supposedly had in stock. We had 3,000. "Clara, quick question." Sarah called me from her customer service prison. "Henderson Tools is saying we've missed 3 deliveries this week, but the system shows them as complete." "You should escalate that to Devin," I said, knowing full well that Devin was in San Francisco at a supply chain innovation summit, learning about blockchain applications while our actual chain was breaking. The fulfillment rate for June was 92.1%. We were now in breach of the North Point contract, but the reports Devin was generating and Evan was reviewing showed 94.3%. They were counting scheduled deliveries as completed deliveries. A creative accounting trick that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so dangerous. I spent my advisory days writing meaningless white papers about supply chain philosophy that no one would ever read, attending optional workshops on personal branding, and watching the company I'd protected for 12 years drive itself off a cliff in slow motion. It was like being forced to watch someone play Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun while insisting they understood probability. The Thursday before it all came crashing down, I was cleaning out my desk, the third desk in as many months, when I found an old photo from our team celebration 5 years ago. We just landed the North Point contract. I was standing between my original team, holding the signed agreement, everyone smiling like we'd just won the lottery. In a way, that contract had generated over $800 million in revenue.